Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Academy session on how to set ambitious corporate targets and accelerate progress on the global goals. Today's session is part one in a series of two that we are running between now and the end of September on SDG Ambition, the UN Global Compact's new initiative that aims to challenge and support participating companies in setting ambitious corporate goals and targets aligned with the SDGs and in accelerating the integration of those goals and targets into core business management. While today's discussion will focus on the aspects of good and ambitious goal setting, part two of the series, which will take place during UN General Assembly Week in September, that will take a closer look at the integration component of SDG Ambition. And we look forward to telling you more about that session a little later. My name is Nessa Whelan, and I'm just delighted to be your host for the session today. As you can see from the agenda outline, we're going to start with a brief introduction to SDG Ambition, what it's designed to achieve, and the plans for rolling it out in the coming months. The second item on the agenda will serve as a teaser for the type of discussion and learning that participants in the SDG Ambition program will engage in over the coming months, including an overview on the importance of a holistic approach to goal setting and an introduction to the current set of SDG Ambition benchmarks, which represent the line in the sand that we are calling on all companies to align their goal setting, ambition, and strategies with. As part of this, we'll be inviting you all on the call today to help us further shape and further refine the current set of benchmarks over the coming weeks. So following that, then we'll have an interactive panel discussion where we will hear about the importance and value of raising ambition level of corporate goals and learn from the experiences of leading experts and practitioners on the opportunities and challenges that companies are facing in this regard. After that, we will have a brief Q&A where we, together with our panelists, look forward to responding to your questions. And for this, we would encourage you all to use the chat function and to submit any questions that you may have throughout the course of the session. Submit them through the chat and we will try to respond to as many of them as we can during that Q&A break. Finally, we will then share next steps and provide information on how to join us on this journey to raise ambition and deepen the integration of the SDGs into business operations everywhere. So to take us through all of this great content today, I'm delighted to be joined on this session by a number of fellow presenters. The first two contributors I'd like to introduce are the representatives of the two organizations who are partnering with us on SDG Ambition. Michael Hughes is Manager of Sustainability and Responsible Business at Accenture, and Anne Rosenberg, Senior Vice President of UN Partnerships at SAP. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both SAP and Accenture for their commitment to this partnership. Both organizations bring unique and important skills to the design and development of the SDG Ambition program. And you'll be hearing directly from both Anne and Michael at various points throughout the discussion today. In addition to Michael and Anne, we are thrilled to be joined by two great panelists who are going to share their perspectives and experience on ambitious corporate sustainability goals. Andrew Winston is the renowned author of The Big Pivot, co-writer of Green to Gold and countless other articles on strategy and megatrends. Andrew advises some of the world's leading companies on how to navigate environmental and social challenges and hosts Pivot Goals, which is a database of the environmental, social, and governance targets set by the world's largest companies. So has a lot of knowledge and expertise to share. Joining Andrew on the panel today is Marissa Pagnani-McGowan, Group Vice President of Corporate Responsibility at PVH Corp, one of the leading fashion and lifestyle companies in the world. Marissa oversees PVH's global human rights and environmental programs. So we're thrilled to have both Andrew and Marissa join for our discussion, and we really very much look forward to hearing from them and benefiting from their experience a little later in the session. So, why have we launched SDG Ambition? Well, even before the onset of the current pandemic, the need for greater ambition to deliver on the SDGs was clear. The world has not been delivering progress towards the goals at the pace nor scale needed, and now we are already seeing, COVID-19's impacts intertwine with long-standing economic and social inequalities. For example, many of you may already be familiar with this stat, but even before COVID, the World Economic Forum predicted that at current rates of progress, it's going to take 257 years to close the economic gender gap. And now initial evidence is showing that the socioeconomic implications of COVID are impacting women disproportionately, setting that timeline back even further. So right now, we are at the cusp of losing decades worth of progress in our pursuit of sustainable development. And the achievement of the SDGs now becomes an even more ambitious endeavor. The good news is that we are seeing a lot of engagement by business across the SDGs. 81% of the Global Compact companies report taking action in support of the global goals. But the SDGs have not yet motivated the step change in ambition which is needed to achieve them. There is a critical performance gap between the action business is taking right now and the global and societal needs defined by the SDGs. For example, only 39% of companies say that they have targets they believe are sufficiently ambitious to deliver Agenda 2030, that are science-based and/or align with societal needs. This is even further exemplified by the fact that as of today, on an issue as urgent as climate, less than 1,000 companies are taking science-based climate action, and only 420 companies in the world have approved science-based targets. At the same time, companies report that the biggest challenges they face in advancing sustainability is embedding it within their strategies, operations, and value chains. In our last progress report, less than half of the participating companies report that they're embedding the SDGs into their core business, and only 37% are designing business models to support them. Therefore, in January of this year, the UN Global Compact, together with SAP and Accenture, launched SDG Ambition with the aim of supporting companies in being more ambitious and transformational in how they run their businesses to deliver on the 2030 agenda. The SDG Ambition guidance that we are developing, represented here on the slide, the basis of the program that we will roll out to support companies in raising the ambition and deepening integration of their goals. As part of the program's first step, companies will gain an understanding of the importance of baseline actions grounded in the UN Global Compact's 10 principles and how to strategically prioritize action to ensure a holistic approach and maximize impacts across the goals. Following that, companies will then receive guidance on how to align new or revise existing goals to the ambition level that is required to achieve the SDGs, as represented by the new SDG Ambition benchmarks. Then, critically, the program will help companies design processes to ensure that the related actions and targets needed to achieve those goals are fully integrated into the heart of business management systems. As part of the program, participants will also explore the potential of enabling technologies that are out there in the market to help manage and track their progress over time. The UN Global Compact will then offer companies the opportunity to publicly share their ambitious commitments aligned with the benchmarks to their stakeholders through our website, where they'll be able to communicate their progress as part of their annual COP. So this step-by-step guidance will be provided to companies that sign up to the SDG Ambition through a series of programmatic modules offered through our local networks and with the support of our partners. Delivered via a series of workshops, the modules will run for a span of about 6 months, and we're happy to note that so far we have 24 local networks that have already committed to running the SDG Ambition program in their countries in the coming year. For companies in countries where there may not be a local network or where the local network is not running SDG Ambition, we will also offer a virtual version of the program to participants, to participating companies through the Global Compact Academy, which is our online learning platform. So run in parallel with this in-country track, it'll be delivered in English and will be a somewhat condensed version of what will be offered in country. So details for how to join will be shared at the end of the session, and we hope that over the next couple of years, SDG Ambition will engage at least 1,000 companies in over 30 countries across all continents. This quote from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sums up really what we are aiming to achieve through the program. And we need to be more ambitious in our strategies to achieve the goals. We need to go deeper and to really implement and integrate the goals across our organizations. And we need to speed up our efforts in this regard. So through SDG Ambition, we aim to provide the relevant support and guidance companies need to effectively respond to this call. So hopefully by now you should have a general good understanding about the context and the objectives behind SDG Ambition. And now we'd like to provide a brief overview of some of the core elements of what the program will offer participants and what they'll be guided through in the first couple of modules. I'm going to start by highlighting the importance of ensuring a holistic and systemic approach to goal setting in a way that maximizes an organization's impact across the goals. I'll then hand over to Michael, who will introduce the SDG Ambition benchmarks and provide an overview of what it means for companies to align with that level of ambition that they represent. So, core to the UN Global Compact is the understanding that raising ambition is both about responsibilities and opportunities, and that when we examine ambition or ambitious transformation for the SDGs, we cannot overlook the foundation to enabling long-term sustainable business conduct. So key to making a meaningful contribution to and supporting the achievement of the SDGs is behaving and operating in a manner that is aligned with the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Without these foundational elements anchoring a company's approach to the SDGs, companies risk undermining progress towards the goals. To better understand this, you only need to look at the issue of human rights. For example, the 2030 Agenda is essentially a human rights-based agenda. More than 90% of the 169 targets are actually linked to international human rights treaties and labor standards. This, of course, means that it's absolutely impossible for businesses or anyone else to deliver on the SDGs without taking action on human rights. Or simply put, respecting and supporting human rights is the most certain way to achieve the SDGs. A company that aligns its business practices with the 10 principles and considers its impacts across human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption will ensure that it does not undermine its own SDG efforts and will be well positioned to positively contribute to the 2030 Agenda. Over the last 20 years, the Global Compact has developed a wealth of resources to support companies in meeting their commitment to the 10 principles. And as part of SDG Ambition, we will reinforce the understanding of these essential actions across the principal areas and help participants navigate the resources and tools they need to improve their performance in these critical areas. The interlinkages and interconnected nature of the SDGs is also of crucial importance. So as business takes meaningful action on the goals, it's important to understand that each of the global goals is inherently and deeply connected, and that action taken on one goal can support or hinder achievement of others. As illustrated by this graphic, identifying and addressing the interconnections will help companies to build holistic and systemic approaches that amplifies their positive impacts and mitigates the negative. And by emphasizing the importance of a principle-based approach within the SDG Ambition program, we will help companies reveal opportunities to maximize impact and create positive knock-on effect toward other goals while working to minimize potential harm. So finally, with a good understanding of how action aligned with the 10 principle connects to the goals, companies engaged in the program will then be guided through the process of principled prioritization. And this is a process to help identify the priority areas for a company or that a company should focus on as it works to contribute to the SDGs in a way that's aligned with a principle-based approach. And the two considerations that every company should consider as it begins to prioritize the SDG activities are: the first is to minimize negative impacts. So the focus here is on identifying the most severe negative impacts on people and the environment that are linked to your company's operations and value chain. And as you prioritize the SDGs, this assessment then ensures that you are working to minimize those negative impacts and actually may help you find unexpected opportunities for innovation and positive contributions. While an important point to note here, I think, is that in our recent annual report, we found that while 62% of companies conduct environmental impact assessments, only 18% of companies surveyed have conducted human rights impact assessments. So when you think of how important human rights are to the achievement of the SDGs, this is a staggeringly low number. And we hope that through greater awareness raising and the guidance as part of SDG Ambition, we'll be able to contribute to a significant rise in that figure moving forward. The second lens to consider then is how to maximize your positive impact. And this is an opportunity for companies to identify the global goals that they can best contribute to through their operations, services, or investments aligned with core business practice. This is done by mapping an organization's skills and capabilities with an aim to highlight positive impacts both now and in the future. In guiding companies through this exercise to identify the strategic priorities to support the goals, we'll not only contribute to their achievement, but to reinforcing the resilience and long-term success of companies into the future. So principal prioritization is a tool that will empower companies in 3 ways. It'll help them align company strategy, efforts, and allocation of resources with the goals that reflect their significant impacts both now and in the future. It'll help them identify new business models, strategies, products, and activities necessary to achieve the scale and transformation needed. And it'll help to avoid cherry picking, meaning selecting the goals and targets based on what's easiest for companies rather than what accounts for their biggest impacts. And SDG washing, which is reporting on the positive and ignoring the negative impacts across the goals. So as part of the program, we'll be providing companies with guidance on the specific tools and resources that they can use to assess their impacts across the SDGs so that they can have a better baseline understanding of where they should be prioritizing their activities. And this ensures a more holistic thinking about the opportunities to drive ambitious transformation. And once you've identified the priorities, you then need to set your ambition level to align with the aspiration of the global goals. And to provide an overview of how SDG Ambition will support companies in doing that, I would now like to hand over to our partner, Michael Hughes at Accenture, who's going to take us through the next set of slides. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Nessa, for that great introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining today, and especially thank you to SAP and the UN Global Compact for letting us work with you guys on this exciting transformational agenda. So as we talk about the SDG Ambition benchmarks, I think it's important to understand the context we're operating in when it comes to goal setting. There's been quite an evolution over the last several years when it comes to moving from kind of more incremental progress to thinking about absolute, impact-oriented, and really interconnected goal setting. I think this evolution has taken place in a few different layers, right? So we've moved from these really incremental goals, thinking about just % reductions against specific issues, to absolute goals, really grounded in science, thinking about how companies can really achieve the SDGs where we may not have all the answers today. And that's thinking about things like a CO2 reduction in line with a 1.5 degree pathway. We may not have all the answers today, but we need to set that level of ambition because that is what is required to deliver on the SDGs. And another layer is thinking about, we move from more output oriented, so thinking just about the volume of waste we're generating as an example, to really think about the impact oriented ability we can do to drive outcomes for business as well as society and the environment. So limiting waste across the entire business is a more ambitious way to think about impact-oriented goal setting. We've also seen a move from more philanthropic-focused impact to building on philanthropy to enable your products and services to really be more sustainably oriented and really engaging your global value chain to deliver those, so thinking about how you can use those sustainable products and services to provide differentiated revenue across the business. And finally, thinking about how you track and measure against these goals. So we've had a history of kind of having sustainability be independent of the business, so they're kind of off in the corner sometimes, where we need to move to more interconnected KPIs where sustainability is at the core of the business strategy and really connected to how you're managing your business day to day and core to your operations. So within this context, this is really how we started to think about the SDG Ambition benchmarks. Now, one of the things we heard from the 2019 CEO study with the Global Compact was business had some trouble understanding how you actually translate the SDGs for business. And that was really the primary focus of this element of the program, is to really establish what are those ambitions that are really required for business. So we spent several months looking at this, taking both a kind of dual analysis approach. So we have our 17 goals, the 169 targets beneath them, and we really looked at that very bottoms up kind of view, goal by goal and target by target. Where is business contributing to this? What is their impact? How are companies establishing goals against these? And where is business really positioned to make a difference? And whereas sometimes those goals maybe need to be more aligned to national governments. So we spent a lot of time looking at those, as well as kind of looking at more thematically. So a lot has changed in the 5 years since the SDGs were released. So we wanted to make sure that we were kind of considering a lot of things that have changed in the social narrative and that we were capturing those as part of our analysis. So as an example, LGBTQ issues have really risen to the forefront and business has taken a leading action on those. So we want to make sure things like that are included as part of the broader inequality and anti-discrimination discussion. As you can imagine, this generated quite a long list of potential topic areas for business to focus in on. So we wanted to kind of focus in on the biggest areas for business impact. So we used a couple different analysis pieces to focus in on those. One was where we felt business had the greatest amount of control and impact. So where have companies in particular had an impact either negatively or positively on these different issues, and where can they be a large part of the solution moving forward? As an example, a handful of companies control a large share of the world's fishing. And if we got just that handful of companies to adopt sustainable fishing, that would really drive the whole agenda on sustainable fishing and healthy oceans forward. So we use that lens across the goals to understand where business could really drive the whole 2030 agenda forward. As a parallel to that, we wanted to understand where there was a consensus standard. So a lot of the logos you see at the bottom are organizations who have been working on these topics for a number of years, and certainly not an exhaustive list. And I want to thank anyone who's from these organizations, as that research was really foundational to the work we did. But we really were looking for areas where we felt like there was sufficiently mature science and research to establish a measurable and absolute target. So things like the Science-Based Target Initiative that really had that well-grounded scientific understanding to establish a standard. So through this process, we consulted hundreds of SMEs over the last few months and kind of got down to our initial set of 10 benchmarks, which we released at the UNGC Leaders Summit last month. So this set of 10 benchmarks covers across a various set of ESG topics. So you can see here, we've kind of moved from, as Nessa rightly highlighted, just a single kind of one-to-one SDG mapping to thinking about that really interconnected approach, how some of these topics can have a number of ripple effects across them. So this covers things on the social side, from living wages to gender balance across all levels of management, to covering a number of environmental topics from circular economy to climate change, as well as dealing with the anti-corruption agenda and bribery. So we really tried to represent areas where business has a really strong role to play. And we feel like these 10 are kind of this really strong starting point for us as part of this agenda. Now, a couple things I want to highlight here in particular. This is not the end of the list, and this is not the only ways companies can be ambitious. I think this is our starting point where we feel like business is really well positioned to advance these particular topic areas. But this list is meant to be living. It is meant to grow and change over time as we get new scientific understanding. These targets themselves may need to evolve, but also there's an interest to expand this list to other topics such as anti-discrimination and other areas, as well as to focus in on areas where industry has a very particular role. So certain high impact industries may have specific targets that they would need to adopt to really be more ambitious when it comes to the SDGs. The other piece is we really do want input on this. As Nessa highlighted, we have a feedback form out on the SDG Ambition website. We really do want feedback on this. We've consulted a lot of folks over the last several months, but it's not the end all be all of folks, and we want different industries to be represented. We want different geographies. We want to make sure this list really does represent ambition for the global community. So we really do welcome any feedback you have on these, as well as ideas for the future if we can expand this list to other topic areas. So please feel free to check out the link here on the SDG Ambition website to provide your inputs. Now, with these benchmarks, how do you actually go about adopting these and integrating them into your organization? So I think there's really three fundamental phases to this. So one is to understand how you can actually assess where you are today. So thinking through what are your current and potential positive and negative impacts on the SDGs through your business activities. So one is to understand how are you just a generally good actor in the business community. So understanding your baseline expectations in line with the 10 principles, as well as understanding how you can impact the SDGs and what business value is kind of tied to those. Understanding all those interconnections is really foundational to understanding how you can move forward and be more ambitious. With that grounding, understanding how you can set up and really raise your level of ambition using these benchmarks to kind of set that ambition. So understanding what the scope may need to be for your goals. What are the relevant metrics and KPIs aligned to your various reporting standards? Who has the ownership? Who has the accountability? And how do you incentivize those people to really make sure that they deliver on these goals ultimately. And finally, to make sure that they are time bound, so that they have not only a final delivery date, but a set of interim milestones to hold people accountable through their program. And lastly, one organization cannot do this on their own. That's why SAP and Accenture are here helping the Global Compact with this, but we want to make sure that everyone's kind of in it together. And so we really want to encourage organizations to collaborate not only with their peers, but with their competitors and their industry groups, kind of share not only what goals they're setting, but how they're going about them and what challenges they're having. We need to innovate on some of these issues. Some of these are really hard. We need to come together and really try and take this whole agenda forward. And we think about not only how we set ambitious goals, but how we embed them across business and really engage the technology ecosystem to bring it to bear. So with that kind of context on how we think about goal setting and the SDG Ambition benchmarks, I'll pass it back to Nessa to take us to our esteemed panel.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. And I do, in the interest of time, want to jump straight into our panel discussion and to hear from our leading practitioners and experts. So Andrew, Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today. And in the spirit of giving feedback on the goals that we want to encourage everyone to do, Andrew, I might invite you to share your feedback to the current set of benchmarks and your reflections and reactions to the list, the level of ambition that's represented there, and if in your view there's anything missing that we need to add, or just keen to get your overall thoughts.
First of all, thank you for having me. I always enjoy being with and working with the UN Global Compact. The quality of the stuff you put out is really great. I think this is a great report. It's important to kind of set the standard on what goals should be. Just for context, because I do a lot of work with companies, and as you mentioned, I have a database of goals. The goal setting practice has been evolving pretty quickly, and we'll come back to some of this, I think, later in the Q&A and the discussion. But the movement is to bigger and bolder goals, right? And so, just keep in mind, 5-6 years ago, there were maybe a dozen companies in the world that had said they wanted to be 100% renewable. P&G and Walmart and IKEA were the early ones. And now there's whatever it is, 400 or something signed up on RE100, which I'm on their advisory board. And so there's been a huge shift, right, in setting goals with the word 100% or zero. These used to be kind of intentional statements. And I think the expectations on companies, the other kind of context is that, if you want to attract and retain in companies, millennials, Gen Z, if you want a license to operate, these aren't really optional anymore, to have a statement about where do you stand on these really big social and environmental issues. Now, looking at the list, I think that the 10 that you've picked are obviously, some of the biggest. And, if we hit these kinds of targets on, living wage and gender and water and science-based carbon, the world would be a lot better, right, if every company and every person did these. That said, a lot better isn't actually fast enough for what we need now, right? So there's kind of an ambition level we probably have to accelerate. And I'd say, we heard from Michael that there's other topics, and in this report later on, you mentioned a few others that I think will have to be elevated into this list soon. Biodiversity, you mentioned human rights, and one that sounds so wonky, but tax and lobbying. For me, one of the biggest changes in my thinking about corporate strategy and corporate sustainability is that companies need to be using their political power for the kinds of action that we need. We are at the point now where voluntary or even corporate level goals, even these goals, even as good as these, isn't enough, right? We're heading towards 3 degrees, maybe more, which we're not totally sure is livable, right? We're heading towards something that we don't know how that will work for billions of people. And so we need systemic change. We need government change too. And so companies need to get off the sidelines, frankly. So I think that question of lobbying and where you're putting your money and your taxes, where you're putting your political power, has to start being goals. And those are hard to put goals on, but I think we can do it, right? Many of these areas didn't have quantitative goals 5-10 years ago. So the ambition level is a really interesting question. These are ambitious, but and as you said earlier, the number of companies doing like a human rights assessment is really low. The number setting a science-based target, even though it's hundreds of companies, the number of the biggest companies is still pretty low, maybe 15-20%. And even the percentage of companies reporting to CDP, reporting their carbon, is like 75-80% of the global 500. That sounds high, but that tells me that 20-25% of the biggest companies in the world aren't either tracking or talking publicly about carbon. Now imagine if they weren't reporting their earnings or something like that. You'd find that crazy. This is carbon. It's the biggest issue we have facing humanity, and there's still a quarter not doing that. So on some level, these are really ambitious, but I kind of question whether ambition is the right word for some of these. I mean, I've said for years that a science-based target it's not really ambitious or not. That's kind of, it just is. It's what's required. It's like if you go to the doctor and they say, you have cancer, you need 6 months of chemo, and you say, I'm going to just try 2 months and I'll see if that's enough. And the stretch goal will be what you tell me we need. Or on a positive example, you had to work out, you want to run a marathon, and you say, I'm just going to train for a week and see if that does it and try to run a marathon. There's an amount we need to do. And I don't think it's ambitious. It's just what needs to happen. And so I think we have to think beyond these for the next level, which is that what I'd say is missing, if anything, is that we need to start setting systemic goals. And we'll get to in a minute kind of the criteria used, and they're really good. But we need goals kind of for the system. And water is a great example. You need goals for the watershed, not just a company's water use. And the same thing for, basically, this is the planetary boundaries conversation. And we need to be setting those as a group. And they need to be also regenerative, right? We need to be starting to go beyond 100% reduction or zero or something. And to be blunt, the reason is that the companies and countries and people who get it and want to go to this level isn't everybody. And so we need the ones who get it to actually go beyond 100% and start regenerating to make up for the laggards. I mean, fundamentally, we have to get to a level of change on these metrics. And I also think the companies that do that will do better. They'll do better because of it. So look, this is a great list, but as I said, I think we need to be thinking systemic and past 100 to a regenerative focus as well.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for your feedback there. And I think we will be aiming to kind of scale the ambition level over time, but are keen to get the bulk of our companies on the board. Just on that, Mike or Andrew, and thinking about the criteria that Michael set out, I would like to get your perspective on that, given your extensive research on this space. How does the criteria that was outlined align with your own thinking around what it means to really embed sustainability within the business?
Yeah, look, the four you have, just I think if I have them right, from incremental to science-based, from kind of your own impacts to value chain, from some sense of philanthropy to getting it into the core business, and on kind of siloed KPIs on like carbon and water to interconnected ones in the company. Yes, on all of those. Those are all great and critically important, especially, as I said, science-based, it's kind of a given. And importantly, that value chain perspective. I mean, fundamentally, what we're talking about is taking responsibility for how your company impacts the world. And I don't mean it kind of in the dry corporate social responsibility sense, but in just responsibility as you would as a human for your actions and how you touch people. A company has to be thinking much broader. I think those are the right criteria. I'd add to it, I guess, that there's some sense of the partnerships that we need. So it's from solo, like I said, systemic kind of targets. It's from solo goals to a partnership level. And that there's, again, this kind of a need for, I think, a personal ownership even within companies, from just saying we have a company-wide target to saying, okay, who? Like what department in this company is actually responsible for hitting this and responsible for working with NGOs and governments and other companies? And it's interesting, like you mentioned Anne from SAP has a title about, she's the partnership person for SAP. Like that's the kind of thing companies need to do. Have someone this is their job, right? To do this kind of interrelationship. So I think this is all really good practice, and the list is right. Again, I just would add this sense of this kind of systemic that we have to start talking about. And again, those are hard to set goals for, but I think it's really what companies need to start doing to think beyond the definition of a company in this kind of very narrow kind of, what are our assets? What's our four walls? We have to really break that down pretty quickly. You're muted now.
Thank you for that, Andrew. I'd like to bring Marissa into the discussion now. And Marissa, recognizing that PVH has set a number of ambitious targets aligned with the benchmarks and across them, also interested in getting your reactions, similar to Andrew, to the current set. But then going back to what I was presenting earlier around, prioritization, would be really keen to hear, how PVH went about prioritizing your areas of focus, and if you, when assessing your impacts, if anything surprised you that you've responded to.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me, and just hearing all of you speak, it's nice to get a little inspiration, a little fire back. So I'm very excited to be here and to share a bit. Just to start, in terms of the benchmark, of course, as a corporate practitioner, the first thing I do is look and say, how close are we to actually hitting these? Do we have the same benchmarks? What are we going to need to update? But I actually found them to be, nicely ambitious, in the sense that they go beyond some of ours, which helps to pull us along, but also consistent with the best practice we were seeing and hearing from. So very excited about those, and using them internally right now to think about what we would need to update. And as I think a number of you mentioned, none of our targets are static. So they have to constantly evolve. I mean, it's amazing that last May, we announced this new 2025-2030 vision called Forward Fashion, new level of ambition and transparency. We're already looking at some of those targets and feeling like they absolutely need to be updated. Some because we actually weren't in a position yet to know how how we're going to drive something forward. I think Michael made that point. We may not know yet how we're going to get somewhere, and what that roadmap looks like, and what are those incremental steps we can take. So some of those updates are around that. Other updates are around the court of public opinion and shifting expectations from our stakeholders on what a corporation should be delivering. And as the science gets better, to Andrew's point, it's no longer okay just to be using more sustainable cotton. We want to be contributing to the regenerative conversation as well as biodiversity. So very happy to have announced these targets, but at the same time, already feeling like we're thinking about how to update them. And I think the next slide shows how we've mapped them to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I actually just texted a picture of Accenture's mapping, which actually has, showing the wheel with the different targets, and also the connection to the different levels of the value chain. So very excited to also be updating this visualization. I found that really helpful. That all said, I mean, I think this can be really daunting, and I don't think we need the slide at this point, but happy to have it. I think the process of target setting can be daunting. When we look at why companies haven't set targets, I think a lot of the reason is because you don't even know where to start. And while I believe everything you've shared today, having been on that journey, is absolutely in line and best practice, I do think I may just go super simple and tell you a bit about how we did things, and see if it's, if that's helpful to any of the audience. Because I think it's completely consistent with the roadmap that you all have set out. I'd love to get to a place where we're having the conversation that Andrew mentioned about systemic goals. But for now, just for this audience, I think I'm going to take it back to how we got to the targets on the former slide. If that's where you would like.
Yeah, we'll be keen to hear that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is we call this the plumbing, the behind the scenes plumbing. It's not the sexiest work, but it is I believe the work of the work. So starting with materiality assessment, which Nessa, I think how you put it in terms of a principled prioritization, you just have to start with where you can have impact and where it matters for your business, right? And that sounds, when I first heard materiality or principled prioritization, I thought, what does this even mean? But I think the way you broke it down, where can I impact as a business? Where am I impacting as a business? Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming. So starting with that, we in fashion and apparel have a very human supply chain. So human rights have always been critical in terms of a area of focus for a company like ours. As we've learned more and gone through impact assessments and materiality assessments, we see, wait a minute, human rights also means the water in the community. Human rights also means the emissions in the community. The interconnectedness that you all spoke about. But I think just starting with that materiality and principle prioritization is a great place to start, and certainly where we started. I'm actually looking forward to refreshing our materiality assessment this year. Normally it's sort of a checkbox exercise, if I'm honest. This year, I think with the growing focus on corporations and their role in global conversations, so conversations around social justice, conversations around regenerative agriculture. I mean, the landscape is changing, the expectations are changing, and therefore I think materiality is going to be really interesting this year. Andrew, you may be happy to hear that I work with a group of about 14 to 15 other peer companies globally, and we're considering doing a materiality assessment as a group to think about what should we collectively, as some of the larger players that are trying to really advance these agendas should be thinking about. We'll see how that goes. So we start with that materiality principle prioritization, then ton of internal engagement. I think you have to take people on the journey with you. You have to help them understand. I think one of my biggest roles is really being a translator. So what does our greenhouse gas target or our science-based target mean for you in a raw materials team? How do your material choices actually affect that greenhouse gas target? You've got to connect those dots. As much as we want to be connecting the dots between all of these targets and SDGs, I think you have to start with those conversations. And then as you build, that sort of relationship, then it becomes a feasibility discussion. All right, we want to set a 100% sustainable cotton goal by 2025. Here are the levers we think we can pull. Can you go talk to your supply chain partners? What do you think the challenges are going to be? Do we have to get product development in here? So, you start by mapping, then you go to internal engagement, then you go to feasibility, because the minute you bring this all to the executives, they're going to say, well, how ambitious is this? Are we pushing ourselves too far? Are we pushing ourselves enough? So you've got to have something to respond to there. And of course, what impact will this have on the budget? Be prepared for that conversation and be prepared with the pros and cons of these decisions. I think the next piece is really benchmark, benchmark, benchmark. Another term that sounds fancy, but really we just scan our peer company reports. We scan, the UN Global Compact. What are their benchmarks? How are they setting their ambition? We look at Accenture's reports. We look at SAP's efforts, right? You got to just see what's out there. Sometimes that's a nice thing, because you can use competitive juices to maybe inspire your executives or your leadership to get in there. But I think it also shows that if a peer company can set a target like this and think about how to get there, we should be able to as well. And we hope by setting our more ambitious targets, we're doing that for others. And finally, a lot of external engagement. So for example, with our water target, we worked with the CEO water mandate, we worked with WWF, we worked with GIZ at the basin level. So really getting that professional practitioner's view. Same thing on, for example, our worker participation target, working with the International Labor Organization, Better Work, UN Global Compact again. So I think I just wanted to be super practical. Maybe it was even a little boring, but I think, the mapping and prioritization, going down to the internal engagement, feasibility, benchmarking, and engaging with those external specialists, you can end up with a nice set of targets like this.
That's great. Thank you so much, Marissa. Really appreciate that. I might ask Andrew to come in and just quickly react to that. Did anything come through there you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the list you're seeing, the PBH goals are an example of kind of the best practice and the ways leaders are doing this now. There's usually 3 or 4 kind of big buckets. I mean, most have kind of modeled after the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan that started in 2010. That was kind of the first to say, here's 3 big categories along of our people, our planet impacts, and here's a bunch of big goals and a bunch of specific ones underneath that. And I think you're seeing in all these goals, like there's the 100% or 0 is pretty much in all of them. But, I said before, we need to get to systemic or, cross-sector goals. This is actually like the really critical step that you're almost there on, because you have to start from within a company saying we're setting systemic goals for ourselves. Because if you step back for a second and you say, why do we care about zero waste? Well, you can make the business case and it saves money and whatever, but the reason is, or why do we care about eliminating single-use plastics, right? The reason is we know there's a global issue. We know there's a systemic issue of 8 million tons of plastic going in every year or day. I can't even remember, it's so many, and the problem of the oceans. So you're just about there. The company actually has to start with this level of ambition so that they have credibility to go talk systemically. And I think there's probably people listening who are maybe not from the world's largest companies. It's easy for them to say, we're going to go change a system, but even the small and medium companies, there's a system you're operating in. If it's not a national government you need to work on, it's a state or a local government that you have operations in, or it's a smaller part of your value chain. There's something where you have to start with your own systemic goals that tie to the bigger system issues, right? I mean, all these goals do help the company, but they really are recognizing that there's giant issues that we have to solve as a world. And you start with saying, we're going to do our part. And then you can go step into that, 15 company meeting and say, okay, how do we do this together? And how do we do the pre-competitive and the non-competitive work that we need to? Like finding, solutions to single-use plastics is a worldwide cross-sector problem. There's no way PVH or Unilever or Coke or whoever is going to do that alone. And there's no way they're going to try to. It's impossible, right? You need Dow and DuPont and all these other players to create a new system, either new materials or a new delivery system for products. So yeah, this is I think the great starting point. I'm sorry if Marissa, that sounds bad to say it's a starting point, because I know the effort it takes to get these passed with your management. But what that means is the C-suite has acknowledged that there's global challenges. Whether they know that's what they just acknowledged, that's what it means. And so then it's easy to walk in and say, so why aren't you working with the other 12 CEOs in our sector? It's pretty hard to answer no at that point, because how else are you going to hit some of these? So this is the great way to start.
Great, thank you for that. And I particularly appreciate you bringing in the perspective as well, and of what this means for smaller companies and as opposed to the big leaders in this space. And so with them in mind, I think, Marissa, I'd be really interested for you to tell us a little bit about the business value that these types of goals have had within the company, so that can help kind of build a case for others who may be starting out on this journey.
Thank you. First of all, I think some of these now are going to be considered table stakes. Unfortunately, I think to Andrew's point, whereas we thought these were ambitious a year ago, I think certainly some of these are going to become table stakes pretty quickly. And the amount of work it takes to get to this point, start now. So I think all the studies, I'm sure in, the studies you're publishing and Accenture's publishing, SAP's publishing, we're seeing in Andrew's work, we just know that the expectations of all of our stakeholders, whether they're investors, consumers, our associates, they're going to be expecting certain things that we may have thought of as ambitious before. So I'll start there. I think for us, the work we do in corporate responsibility is a huge source of pride, of motivation, of innovation. We see the highest levels of engagement, whether that's an associate campaign to post photos of how you're responsibly using water, or whether that's the newsletter we send out every month. The level of engagement, the hunger for this information, I think is just, I'm constantly sort of humbled by it. I think also we're in the middle of this shared collective experience where, we're all looking for a little bit of agency and how can I contribute positively to what's going on in the world. And to think that in my job as a designer or a product developer or a supply chain associate, or even a finance expert they've been working with us on virtual power purchase agreements. So there is a role for everybody in this work. And I think it is incredibly inspiring and motivating. And you feel like you're part of something maybe bigger than yourself, really using the power of our brands and company and the decisions we're making day to day to hopefully drive some positive impact or minimize some of the negative impact. Not sure if that's where you wanted me to go with that, but.
Perfect. No, absolutely. I think some great points. And just as a follow-up to that, and this is a question that we got through the chat, and it kind of could be to both of you, but I'll start with you, Marissa. I mean, what best practices for governance structures for these cross-functional teams and collaborations have you seen or have worked well within PVH to support your achievement of these goals?
So I will say we are big and decentralized, and we've got brands and regions and functions. For me, and this may be not the perfect textbook answer, but I think finding champions may be cliched also, but I have our Chief Supply Chain Officer and his executive team are enormous champions for our work, really getting on the same page with them and then figuring out how we cascade things through that. I am very fortunate to report to a CR committee of our board. So we actually have a corporate responsibility committee. We have had one for 8 years. We have our CR reporting, which requires us to engage with different groups. So what are those levers that already put you in an executive conversation, that already give you a license to go and have a conversation? I think those are really important. In terms of governance, it really starts at the board level. We've got an executive council. We have all sorts of folks, I would say, really champions, friends of the sustainability movement, sort of planted everywhere. And it's accessing that network. And sometimes it's very formal, like with our board structure, and sometimes it's informal. But I take sort of a spaghetti at the wall approach to this one. You've got to find what works, and different groups work differently. Sometimes it's hierarchical, sometimes it's passion-led. Trying to figure out what a team's goals are so that we can get into those, and really finding those advocates. So I'm sure, Andrew, you probably have a much, or even Michael. There's a way we should be doing it. We've got sort of that governance structure, but I think there's also just the day-to-day of how you make this work happen, which sometimes isn't as textbook.
Yeah, Andrew, maybe over to you if there's any particular things that have worked well, I think, governance structures, but other also, in your advice to companies that you've seen or you've experienced, for companies starting out on this journey, like, are there any key critical success criteria or aspects that they should be aware of to have in place in order to be effective?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's easy for people like Michael and myself. We're consultants, so we say just go do it, and obviously it should just happen in companies. So I have ultimate respect for Marissa and Ann and people doing this inside companies. But I've seen different governance structures. I think in most big companies, not most, but there's a lot that have some kind of internal committee, not just the board committee, but an internal committee of either C-suite or maybe people right below that meet regularly, kind of get reports about how this is going and own it. And then some of those executives, you might give an executive ownership over a target that's not actually theirs. Like the CFO would get a diversity target and the COO would get a supply chain. So you kind of cross-seed the organization. So there's a lot of buy-in. And then along with that, I've been on a lot of multinational companies' external sustainability advisory boards that are usually kind of reporting into or working with that internal executive board. So there's kind of external perspectives coming in, and as you're developing goals, that's the group you're usually talking to regularly. We meet 3-4 times a year, say, for some of these big companies. And I think there's often, we could get into a long conversation about, incentives and pay. I think there's differences of opinion on this. I tend to believe there's intrinsic and extrinsic ways that people are motivated. So they care about purpose, obviously, and that matters, but they also do what they're paid to do, or at least do faster what they're paid to do. So I think for governance, you got to put some of these KPIs and metrics into the pay, at least the operational people. The very senior people, you could make an argument that the pay isn't going to make a huge difference. They make a lot of money anyways, that it's really going to be about, do they make it in the organization? Are they, do they fit? They either get it or they don't. But for kind of mid-level and below, I think you got to pay people to do this. So if you're in a factory, if you hit zero waste, you get a bonus. You get paid for this. So that's kind of obvious, but that's a critical governance path.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm just looking at the time here. I mean, I think we could go on for so much longer. I really appreciate the insights and expertise we're drawing out of this discussion. And I hate drawing it to a close, but maybe Andrew, just in 30 seconds, I'd love to hear. I know you're in the middle of writing a new book. What are you hearing, or as you reflect in your research over the years? What are the biggest trends? What is striking you as different right now in your conversations with leading CEOs in 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna hand over to Anne. So yeah, keen to hear your thoughts.
So, okay, 30 seconds. If you want to put up the slide I sent you that just shows the data from my database from early in the 2010s till last year, that shows the kinds of goals that are set. It's small, it might be hard to see, but the ones I'm pointing at there are quantitative goals about women and human rights, meaning in 2012, there were 0 goals in the largest 200 companies in the world that were quantitative, right? They just said, we want women to have parity. Now there's 30% of those companies have a goal 40% of women in management will be women. So like I said before, there's a shift to more quantitative. I also just say, look, what's happening in the world, and my thoughts, we have to kind of keep remembering that we're in the middle of really one of the worst human health crises in history. And companies are being asked to take a stand, to play a role, and to play a role in race, LGBT, all sorts of things. So I think we're going to see more and more goals and statements around the racial mix of their companies and their suppliers, the LGBT mix, the goals for how you're going to kind of enable that part of our society to succeed. I just think companies are going to have to think much broader about their role in society, and they will have to set goals around it.
Wow, okay, so the main takeaways from the discussion, I think, today is that we're going to have more goals, and we're going to have targets that are going to be evolving and getting more ambitious over time. This is great stuff. We're definitely going to have you both back, because we could go for another hour. So I'm going to unfortunately bring the discussion to a close, but really happy to hand over to Anne now, who's going to tell us a bit more about really, in order to get this done, we need it integrated fully within companies. And so, Anne, over to you, and tell us more about that and the upcoming, the phase 2 of the Academy series, part 2.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nessa, and big thanks to you and Global Compact Essential for this amazing collaboration. And thanks for all the great input from Andrew and Marisa. There's no doubt about it. SDG Ambition, the way I look at it, is going to help us really to achieve the 17 global goals. And as the General Secretary said, the SDG Ambition, the business benchmarks, is really a translation of these 17 global goals for the private sector. So therefore, when you look at the SDG Ambition, and this is what we can call the next part of the SDG Ambition is about, when we come out with integration guides at the General Assembly, the 75 years here in mid-September, it's all about how do we now implement, the business benchmarks. And we shouldn't see it as an additional project. We should see it as an integrated project of our ongoing digital transformation. And that's also the reason why that all the people listening in today should think about that when they bring this back into the organization, they need to make sure that the Chief Information Officer, the whole technology department of the company, the line of businesses, that they know about this, and that the ongoing projects that is going on, whatever it is, changing the supply chain, looking at the procurement business processes, looking into the way we run our finance, whatever we do, I call it the backbone of the company, we need to stop up and say, did we actually bring in the right business benchmark, the right ambition to what we want to change? And that's why we are really excited. So when we launched the integration guide that you saw earlier, when Nessa showed the 3 guides, where 2 of the guides you can download on your Global Compact SDG Ambition site. The 3rd guide is the integration guide, where we take the business benchmarks and we have mapped them to the underlying business process step, down to field level, down to what kind of data set do you need to collect to be able to do the measurement. And that has then been mapped into an enterprise architecture. And that is the link, what I call the magic, where we really can go in and build solutions, solid solutions that can make sure that we fulfill. Because it's not enough just to go in and do an as-is assessment and look at how far we are from the benchmark, how far are we from what we really want to achieve. No, we also then afterwards need to go in and then change the way we are operating the business. And that's where we need to go into business process management, business process innovation, and then go in and build technology solution for this. And this is why we have launched the SDG Ambition Accelerator. And the SDG Ambition Accelerator is an accelerator on 6 months that will start in October, where we really take companies that is now signing up to be part of the business SDG Ambition, help them to go through those phases. So it's really around helping accelerating the member of UN Global Compact worldwide to go in and really implement, and this is what we talk about, signing up to business benchmark is about implementing new behavior in the company, new solutions in the company, new business models in the company to be able to. And of course, the first guide that came out was about the frameworks. The first guide is the framework. The second guide that is out is the 10 business benchmark, where you also have an industry perspective, because some of the business benchmark are more applicable in some industry than others. And the third guide is in the integration guide. So if you have not yet signed up to the SDG Ambition Accelerator, it's time to do that. If you haven't signed up to UN Global Compact, I think most of you have, it's time to do that and really begin not just to do greenwashing that Nessa talks about and pretend that we achieve the global goals, but that we really now are beginning to run digital transformations where the business benchmark is in the center of what we want to achieve. So thank you so much, Nessa. Much more to come here in September.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Andrew, Marissa, Michael. Really great session. Definitely having you guys back again. Reminder to everyone, check out the website, UN Global Compact /SDG Ambition to sign up. And don't forget to provide feedback to the current set of goals. So we really want your input on these over the next couple of weeks. Thanks to everyone, Pia, Alyssa, Sam in the background for all your help and support. Really great. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.